call you that. Perhaps let's take a look at what these reforms might actually have for the African continent.
Well, the reforms, thank you so much for inviting me to the discussion. The reforms were meant to actually streamline the functions of the AU, to make it different from the OAU, which of course we got to learn during our primary school days. And obviously, you know what, just like you said, it's been a toothless bulldog. So the reforms were meant to give it some kind of teeth, to make it more useful to Africans. And I think the reforms were, let me say, crafted and drafted in good faith. What we've not been able to see is what we call consistent effort to actually actualize the whole idea of reforms. The number of heads of state and government from Africa who are committed into seeing a functional AU is very, very small. So that is why there's been some kind of drag on the whole idea of reforms. If you look at the reform areas, it talks about continental priorities such as peace and security and political affairs. It talks about institutional realignment of the organization itself. It talks about connecting with Africans, which of course focuses on things like gender parity in governance and all that. It talks about sustainable financing for the AU itself. So they're very, very prime or serious reform areas, and they should be given all the support they deserve for the AU itself to actually be functional. So again, that is why there should be a lot of mobilization of the other heads of state and government to support the reforms. Now, the biggest problem is if Kagame, of course, is going to leave office because, you know, his term is coming to an end, yes, the next chairperson of the union might not be as committed to the entire reform agenda as Kagame is.
Okay, now that's definitely a point of worry, but we'll get to it later on. Let's just touch base on some of the functions of the African Union. In its functions, the African Union is supposed to promote peace in the continent. Now, this might be a bone of contention right now because, as we well know, yes, there are many African countries that enjoy peaceful transitions from one government to the other that do not have civil unrest in those countries. But when we highlight various countries, especially in the Sahel region, we talk about Nigeria. They have the consistent problem with Boko Haram. Yes. As we well know, they strategically place themselves around Lake Chad, border of Niger, border of Nigeria and Cameroon as well. Yes. And insecurity is a major concern, not just there, but even if you take a look closer home, we also note that Al-Shabaab has been a major problem. Now, in terms of insecurity and in terms of this matters, has the AU really done its mandate? Do Africans feel well represented?
Now, you know, the issue of peace and security is a serious one, and it's not a problem just for the African continent. Wherever you go, you know, all over the world, it is a problem. It's a serious challenge. Now, for Boko Haram, I think the commitment of African forces under the AU has not been as robust as it ought to be. But when it comes to Somalia, I think the support the Somali government has gotten in its combat against Al-Shabaab has been a bit strong. You remember we had we have the African Union Command, which is, of course, again, championed by the AU. African countries have serious problems when it comes to, you know, the economies. And for you to have a serious force, a serious fighting force which can combat a militia that is as resilient and resistant as Al-Shabaab, you need a serious economic base. Most African countries are struggling. That is why they cannot even be able to send their forces to combat those militant groups. So I think for Al-Shabaab, the response has been okay. But when we talk about Boko Haram in Nigeria and all that, it's not been as robust and as strong as it ought to be. That is why the reforms now come in. For us to witness a serious kind of defense for African countries, of course, under siege from militant groups and terrorists, we need a reformed and functional AU.
We surely do. But one thing that I note, these terrorist groups actually take advantage of a state of lawlessness in particular regions.
Exactly.
And perhaps as the African Union, even if this requires so much economic support, they surely can do something about the state of lawlessness in particular regions, right?
Yeah, of course there's something you can do. When it comes to the whole idea of democracy, when a country is organized and the rule of law is respected, elections are held in a fair and free manner, guys can participate, their votes can not only be counted, but they should also count, guys get satisfied. But you see, what leads to lawlessness is lack of satisfaction. When you have unaccountable systems, when you have elections which cannot be actually accredited. You know, that's when you get guys who get disenfranchised, they get disoriented, and then they decide fighting a government. So the whole idea, what we can do, what Africans can do to support, to bring about some law and order, is to respect democracy in the first place. Because if you go to Al-Shabaab, of course, it's at the end of the day a terrorist group, but they have some kind of contention with the government. Okay. They feel like they're not represented. If you go to Nigeria, it's the same argument. So if the democracy that we've always fought for as Africans can be entrenched and supported, then, you know, we are going to be able to reduce the number of guys who come out to protest against governments, which of course will lead to a reduced number of militant groups opposing governments. Now, even if we don't have a serious economic base, we can at least support democracy, which can reduce militancy.
Speaking about the economic base, let's shift focus to the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, 44 African countries converged on March the 21st this year, and actually some of those member states signed that particular framework. Now, the issue about this particular free trade area is that once it comes into full effect, it will be the largest free trade area, obviously covering over 1.2 billion people in Africa. Now, the advantages of this continental free trade area are many. If we start talking about them, we'll definitely finish time, definitely. Yeah. But let's borrow leaf from some of the regional bodies, which this African Free Continental Trade Area will definitely build up on. The East African Community, for example, has been successful, but we cannot say such about other continental bodies. Talk about the West African Continental, the community rather. Is this something that we should look into even as we prepare to reap the benefits of the African Free Continental Trade Area? Absolutely.
You know, for you to be able to have a strong house, the constituent parts have to be strong in themselves. You know, the building particles have to be strong. So if the East African community, ECOWAS, SADC and all that are solid in their support, you know, for their regional members, then we're going to be able to realize a stronger continental free trade area, of course, as envisioned by the AU architects. So I think as East Africans, as, you know, East African community, we've done our bits, we've done our part, of course. It's not 100% successful. We have our bottlenecks and challenges. But I think as we move forward, it's upon the leaders of the AU, the leaders of African countries, to make sure they support their regional blocks. But again, at the end of the day, when it's again about politics. Sometimes when you focus so much on the regional blocks, you actually forget about the AU. And we have a tendency of fighting for what we call independence sometimes. And that is why even the AU itself does not have so much support, because some guys are scared of ceding ground, losing support, and losing power. Because if you give the AU a lot of power and they come and control your small country, it means you're not going to be as powerful president as you are at the moment. So again, sometimes if you focus so much on the regional blocks, you're going to forget about what? The AU. So
it's a tricky balance.
Yeah, so I think it's all about, again, trying to mobilize all the member states of the AU to actually focus on the AU, so that the Continental Free Trade Area supports all the 54 members of the AU. I don't want us to focus so much. I couldn't want the member states to focus so much on the regional blocks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking about the AU still, I mean, significant progress has been made in its implementation. We have the introduction of quotas for youth and women, very important, rationalization of working methods, and the slow but steady progress towards financial autonomy. Now, this is what I want to focus on. Now, when Kagame came into power at the African Union, he had the vision of a self-sustained African Union. So far, taking a look at the statistics, over 60% of the budget is financed by external donors. Nice. You know, 30% or less is by African countries. Now, I mean, some member states failed to agree on this proposal on levy tax on imports. Now, this was supposed to be a very big contributor to the African Union. I mean, 0.2% on selected products.
Yes.
I mean, are we as Africans shooting ourselves in our own legs?
You know, and again, that goes back to the whole idea of not being willing to cede ground. There are some African, you know, heads of state and government who don't want to see a stronger AU. It's all about, again, what we've been accustomed to. It's a very small number of African leaders who actually want to see a stronger AU, like the late Gaddafi. He wanted to see a united Africa because he felt like he was not going to lose ground or strength or power by just creating a stronger what? Africa. Now, Kagame talks about sustainable financing as one of the 5 areas of reforms that he's been pushing for. And 0.2% is a very small, portion of the import levies we're talking about.
Yes.
So I don't see any reason why the heads of state and government should not support this. And I think going forward, it's a shame that we should expect foreigners to finance our union. So I think it should be given support, and given the kind of support that I've witnessed from the likes of the Kenyan president, it's going to be endorsed. It will be ratified at some point. And apart from some areas of resistance, I think I expect the Egyptian president, the next AU chairman, to oppose. I don't expect him to, oppose the 0.2%, because at the end of the day, if you expect foreigners outsiders to finance your union, then the moment they withdraw, you don't have a union. That is why it's going to be. I think it's going to be supported. And I don't think it's a threat to any economic structure of any member state. It's a very, very tiny portion of, the levies we're talking about.
All right.
0.2%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Abel, it's always a pleasure. Many thanks shedding light on this particular African Union organization and what they are supposed to do. Speak about the reforms introduced by President Paul Kagame. We surely hope the next person in charge, actually supports this, because they seem to be in good faith, right?
Yeah, it's in good faith.
Okay.
Totally, yeah.
Many